Marcus Webb wiped the grease from his hands onto his already filthy cargo pants, surveying the mess of crates scattered across the loading bay of Meridian Cross Station. 3 months of hauling supplies to forgotten colonies had left him exhausted, cynical, and desperately in need of a drink stronger than the recycled swill they served in the station's lower decks. Just finish the inventory and get paid, he muttered to himself, pushing a hand through his unkempt brown hair. At 32, he'd already lived more lives than most people twice his age, each one leaving its own collection of scars and regrets. The loading bay's atmospheric processors hummed their usual monotonous rhythm, so when he heard the scraping sound near the far bulkhead, his hand instinctively moved to the plasma cutter on his belt. Pirates were rare this far into regulated space, but desperation made people stupid in predictable ways. What stumbled into the light wasn't what he expected. She was tall, impossibly so, with skin that seemed to shimmer between pale violet and silver, depending on the angle of the station's harsh lighting. Her hair fell in waves of deepest indigo, past her shoulders, and even from across the bay, Marcus could see she was in trouble. She wore what might have once been elegant clothing, now torn and stained, clinging to a frame that was far too thin. When she looked up, her eyes caught him completely off guard. They were the color of distant nebulas, swirling purple and blue, with flecks of starlight, and they were filled with desperate hunger. "Please," she gasped, her accent musical despite her obvious distress. "I need help." Marcus had survived this long by minding his own business, but something about the way she swayed on her feet, one hand pressed against the bulkhead for support, made him move forward instead of reaching for his communicator. "You're not supposed to be in this sector," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Customs will have you in detention before you can explain whatever story brought you here." "I cannot go to customs," she whispered, taking another unsteady step forward. "They will send me back, and I would rather die than return." She punctuated this statement by collapsing. Marcus caught her before she hit the deck, surprised by how light she felt despite her height. Up close, he could see the faint pattern of scales along her temples and the subtle points of her ears. More concerning were the dark veins visible beneath her translucent skin and the way her chest barely rose with each shallow breath. "Stars above, what happened to you?" he asked, though he wasn't expecting an answer from someone who just passed out in his arms. He should have called medical services, should have alerted station security, should have done any number of things that would have been sensible and kept him out of trouble. Instead, Marcus found himself carrying her toward his ship, the Wandering Star, docked in the adjacent berth. The ship's medical scanner was basic, designed more for treating radiation burns and decompression injuries than diagnosing alien physiology, but it gave him enough information to know she was dying. Her core temperature had dropped below what the scanner considered survivable, and something about her cellular structure was breaking down at an alarming rate. "What are you?" he wondered aloud, studying the readouts. Her eyes fluttered open, those nebula-colored irises struggling to focus on his face. "Sanguix," she managed. "We are called sanguix." The word tickled something in Marcus's memory, fragments of stories told in station bars and whispered among traders who ventured into the far reaches. Blood drinkers, elegant, ancient, and incredibly rare. "You need blood?" he said, not a question. "Serum," she corrected weakly. "Synthesized. I was traveling to the outer colonies when my ship was sabotaged. My supplies were destroyed." Her hand grasped his wrist with surprising strength. "I have perhaps hours left. The station has no serum. My people are too far away." Marcus looked at the readouts again, and at her face, watching the light slowly fading from those impossible eyes. He'd seen death before, had become far too familiar with it over the years. Something about watching it claim this strange, beautiful creature felt fundamentally wrong. What about the real thing? He heard himself ask. She stared at him, confusion mixing with the pain etched across her delicate features. Real? Blood? Marcus clarified, already rolling up his sleeve. Not synthesized. Would it work? Horror replaced confusion. You cannot offer such a thing. You do not understand what you suggest. Direct feeding, it creates bonds, complications, changes things between our species in ways that cannot be undone. Seems pretty simple to me, Marcus replied, his typical stubbornness rising to the surface. You need blood to live. I've got plenty. Basic mathematics. The effects will be better than you dying in my medical bay and me having to explain a body to station security. He interrupted. Look, I don't know you, and maybe I'm going to regret this tomorrow, but right now you're dying, and I can do something about it. So let's skip the part where you list all the reasons I shouldn't help and get to the part where you don't die. Deal? Nessa she'd later tell him her name was Nessa Voidborn, which he'd find unbearably dramatic, stared at him with an expression that mixed disbelief with desperate hope. You would do this for a stranger? I've done stupider things for worse reasons, Marcus said, settling onto the medical bay's bench beside her. Come on, before I reconsider, and remember, I'm supposed to be a sensible person who doesn't get involved in mysterious alien problems. She moved with agonizing slowness, every motion clearly causing her pain. When she positioned herself beside him, her cool fingers trembling as they touched his neck, Marcus felt his heart rate spike despite his attempt at appearing calm. This will hurt, she warned, her breath ghosting across his skin. And afterward, nothing will be the same between us. The bond created by direct feeding, it is not something my people take lightly. Good thing I'm not your people, Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Now do it before I lose my nerve, and we both regret having this conversation. Her fangs, when they pierced his skin, were sharper than he'd imagined. The pain was immediate and intense, a burning cold that spread from the puncture wounds down through his chest. Marcus gripped the edge of the bench, determined not to make a sound that might make her stop. But then something shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else entirely. He could feel her drinking, feel the pull of his blood leaving his veins, but underneath that was a sensation he couldn't quite name. Warmth where she was cold. Connection where there had been only strangers. A sense of her presence blooming in his mind like stars appearing at dusk. When she finally pulled away, her lips stained crimson, Marcus felt dizzy. But Nessa looked transformed. The deathly pallor had been replaced by a soft glow, those dark veins receding as color returned to her skin. Her eyes, when they met his, were brighter than before, and held something that might have been fear. What did you do? She whispered. Saved your life, apparently, Marcus managed, pressing his hand against the puncture wounds. They were already beginning to close, which seemed medically impossible. Was it supposed to feel like that? No, she breathed. Never like that. What I feel from you, what I see, it is impossible. Human blood should not affect me this way, should not create such a strong bond so quickly. Marcus wanted to ask what she meant, but the medical bay's proximity alarms began shrieking. Through the viewport, he could see station security vessels beginning their patrol routes, and his ship's computer was flashing warnings about unauthorized cargo bay access. We need to leave, he said, pushing himself to his feet despite the lingering dizziness. Whatever complications come from this, we can figure them out after we're not in a detention cell. Nessa stood with him, moving with a fluid grace that had been completely absent before. You would flee for me? Risk your standing with the station authorities? Too late to worry about that now, Marcus replied, already moving toward the cockpit. Besides, you said your ship was sabotaged. Someone wanted you dead badly enough to destroy your supplies and strand you here. Station security might not be safe for either of us until we figure out who and why. As he brought the Wandering Star's engines online, Marcus caught sight of Nessa's reflection in the cockpit glass. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. One hand pressed over her heart, as if feeling something unfamiliar there. "Marcus Webb," she said softly, his name sounding like music in her accent. "You have given me more than life. The bond I feel, it speaks of something deeper, something my people would call soul-threading. Such connections are supposed to be impossible between humans and sanguics." "Yeah, well," Marcus replied, guiding the ship away from its docking clamp as station security finally noticed their unauthorized departure. "Apparently, I'm good at doing impossible things without meaning to. Story of my life." As they cleared the station's gravitational field and jumped faster than light travel, Marcus realized his quiet, uncomplicated existence had just become significantly more complex. The woman the Sanguik sitting in his co-pilot's seat represented mystery, danger, and complications he couldn't begin to predict. But when their eyes met across the cockpit, when he felt that strange new warmth in his chest that seemed to echo her presence, Marcus found he didn't particularly care about the sensible choice anymore. Some things were worth the complications. The Wandering Star hummed through the darkness between stars, its aging engines creating a rhythmic vibration that Marcus had long ago learned to find comforting. Now, though, the familiar sound felt different, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the ship's mechanics and everything to do with the woman sitting in his cargo hold. Nessa had retreated there after they'd cleared Meridian Cross, claiming she needed space to process what had happened. Marcus had given it to her, mostly because he needed time to process it himself. The puncture wounds on his neck had healed completely within an hour, leaving only faint silver scars that seemed to shimmer when the light caught them right. "Ship's computer, run a medical scan," he said, touching the marks. "Scanning," the AI responded in its flat, mechanical tone. "Detecting foreign cellular markers in bloodstream. Unknown classification. No pathogenic properties detected. Subject appears healthy, though heart rate is elevated and neural activity shows unusual patterns. Define unusual. New neural pathways forming in areas associated with empathy and spatial awareness. Cause unknown." Marcus drummed his fingers on the console, watching the stars streak past. "The bond I feel," Nessa had said, "it speaks of something deeper." He could feel it too, a constant awareness of her presence somewhere behind him, like a warm light in the back of his mind. The cargo hold door hissed open, and he turned to find Nessa standing in the doorway. She'd cleaned up, washing away the grime and blood, and found one of his old shirts to replace her ruined clothing. It hung off her tall frame, reaching mid-thigh, and somehow made her look simultaneously more vulnerable and more dangerous. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Agreed." Marcus gestured to the co-pilot's seat. "Want to start with why someone sabotaged your ship?" Nessa settled into the chair with that unsettling grace her people seemed to possess naturally. "I was fleeing an arrangement. What your people would call a betrothal. Arranged marriage?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize your species was into that. Among the noble houses, it is common. Expected." Her fingers traced patterns on the armrest. "I was promised to Drace Corvin, heir to one of the most powerful Sanguix families. The union would have consolidated territories, strengthened alliances, secured my family's position for generations. But you didn't want it." "I did not want him," she corrected, and something dark flickered through her nebula eyes. "Drace is cruel in ways that are considered acceptable among our aristocracy. He views lesser beings as tools to be used and discarded. When I refused the final bonding ceremony, my family was disgraced. So I ran." Marcus leaned back, processing this. "And he sabotaged your ship to stop you. Or to kill me for the insult," Nessa said quietly. "Among my people, A refused betrothal is a stain on honor that can only be cleansed through reclamation or death. Sounds healthy, Marcus muttered. So what was your plan? Run to the outer colonies and hope he'd never find you? I had contacts there. People who owed my family favors before my disgrace. I thought I could disappear, start over. She looked at him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his chest tighten. I did not expect my supplies to be destroyed. Did not expect to find myself dying in a stranger's cargo bay. And now you're bonded to that stranger, Marcus said, which complicates things more than you know. Nessa stood, pacing the small cockpit with restless energy. What happened between us, what I felt when I fed from you, it should not be possible. Human blood is compatible with Sanguic's physiology, yes, but it has never created the kind of bond I feel now. What kind of bond are we talking about? She stopped pacing, turning to face him. I can feel you, Marcus Webb. Your emotions, your presence, like a star burning in my consciousness. When you are near, I feel stronger. When you moved away to pilot the ship, I felt the distance like a physical ache. She wrapped her arms around herself. This is what happens between bonded mates of my kind, not between Sanguics and humans. Marcus stood, crossing the small space between them. He could feel it too, now that she'd named it that pull, that connection that made being close to her feel right in a way that defied logic. Maybe the rules are different when you're dying. Emergency situations, extreme circumstances, that sort of thing. Perhaps, Nessa said, but doubt colored her voice. Or perhaps there is something about you, about your blood, that is unique. Before Marcus could respond, the ship's alarms shrieked. He spun back to the controls, cursing under his breath. 3 vessels had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel behind them, their signatures marking them as Sanguic's craft. That was faster than I expected, he growled, hands flying over the controls. Your former fiancé doesn't waste time. Nessa was beside him in an instant, her eyes scanning the readouts. Those are hunting vessels. Fast, armed, and crewed by trackers, who can follow blood scent across star systems. She went very still. They are following my signature. The bond you and I share, it has made my presence stronger, easier to track. So what you're saying is, saving your life also made you into a giant neon sign that says, "Here I am. Come get me?" I am sorry, she whispered. Marcus was already plotting evasive maneuvers, guiding the wandering star toward a nearby asteroid field. Save the apologies. Right now we need to lose them, and I happen to know these rocks pretty well. The asteroid field was a graveyard of dead worlds, chunks of shattered planets spinning through the void in a deadly dance. Marcus had run cargo through here dozens of times, knew the patterns and safe routes by heart. The Sanguic's hunters would have superior ships, but he had knowledge and desperation on his side. He pushed the wandering star into the field, threading between asteroids with practiced precision. Behind them, the hunting vessels followed, their sleek forms darting through the gaps with unnerving grace. They are gaining, Essa observed, her hand gripping the back of his chair. I know. Marcus banked hard around a tumbling chunk of ice-covered rock, the ship's hull groaning in protest. But they don't know about the needle. The needle? A gap in the field that's barely wider than my ship. If I can reach it before they catch us, we can slip through to the other side. They'll have to go around, buy us hours. A plasma bolt streaked past their viewport, close enough that Marcus could feel the heat through the shielding. The hunters weren't interested in capturing anymore, if they ever had been. Hold on, he said, and pushed the engines to their maximum. The wandering star lurched forward, and Marcus felt Nessa's hand land on his shoulder. The touch sent that now familiar warmth flooding through him. But it also brought something else, a sudden clarity, a heightened awareness of the space around him. He could feel the asteroid's positions without looking at the sensors. could anticipate their movements with impossible precision. "What?" he started. "The bond," Nessa breathed. "My spatial awareness. It is flowing through our connection." "Use it." Marcus didn't question it. He let that strange new sense guide him, weaving through the asteroid field with moves he'd never attempted before. The hunting vessels fell back slightly, their pilots clearly shocked by his sudden increase in skill. The needle appeared ahead, a narrow gap between two massive asteroids that were slowly grinding past each other. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before it closed. "This is insane," he muttered. "I trust you," Nessa said, and squeezed his shoulder. Marcus punched the engines one more time and aimed for the gap. The wandering star shot forward, asteroids blurring past on all sides. The hunting vessels tried to follow, but they were too cautious, pulling back at the last moment as the gap began to narrow. The ship scraped through with centimeters to spare, metal shrieking as it brushed against ancient stone. Then they were clear, shooting out the other side as the gap slammed shut behind them. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was too close. "That was extraordinary," Nessa corrected. She moved around to face him, her eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. "What you did, the way you moved through that field, no human pilot should be capable of such precision." "I had help," Marcus said, looking up at her. "Your spatial thing, it should not work that way. Our bond should not allow such deep sharing of abilities." She knelt beside his chair, bringing them eye to level. "Marcus, I think what is happening between us is unprecedented. The feeding, the bond, the way our abilities are melding, this is something new." Their faces were close now, close enough that Marcus could see the intricate patterns in her irises, like entire galaxies contained in those strange eyes. The warmth in his chest had become almost overwhelming, a magnetic pull that made him want to close the remaining distance between them. "Is this you?" he asked quietly. "This thing I'm feeling, is it some kind of vampire mojo making me want you?" Nessa's laugh was soft, almost sad. "The bond creates connection, awareness, but not false emotion. What you feel is real, Marcus Webb, as real as what I feel." "And what do you feel?" She reached up, her cool fingers tracing the silver scars on his neck. "I feel alive for the first time in centuries. I feel seen, not as a noble daughter or a political bargaining chip, but as myself. And I feel terrified, because in less than a day, you have become more important to me than anyone I have known in lifetimes." Marcus caught her hand, pressing it against his neck where he could feel his pulse jumping. "I'm a cargo runner who barely makes rent on his ship. I've got no family, no prospects, and a talent for making bad decisions. You could do better." "I do not want better," Nessa said, and leaned in to close the distance between them. Her lips were cool against his, but that same transformative warmth spread from the contact, turning cool to perfect, turning strange to right. Marcus pulled her closer, one hand tangling in that impossible indigo hair, and felt her sigh against his mouth. When they broke apart, both breathing harder than necessary, Nessa rested her forehead against his. "The bond is growing stronger. I can feel your heartbeat as if it were my own. Is that normal?" "Nothing about this is normal." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. "But perhaps normal is overrated." Marcus stood, pulling her up with him. The cockpit was too small, too cramped for what he suddenly wanted. "I've got a cabin that's slightly less uncomfortable than these chairs." Nessa's smile was slow, dangerous, and filled with promise. "Show me." The cabin was small, barely more than a sleeping nook with storage, but it was private. Marcus sealed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt even smaller, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the ship's systems. "I should warn you," Nessa said, her voice dropping to something lower, more intimate. "Feeding from you has awakened hungers I have long kept dormant. Just hunger? Marcus asked, stepping closer. Among other things. Her hands found his shirt, fingers sliding beneath the fabric to explore the warmth of his skin. My people experience desire differently than humans. More intensely. The bond has amplified everything. Marcus caught her wrists gently, holding her still for a moment. I need to know you want this, not because of some blood bond, but because you actually want this. Nessa's eyes met his, and in them he saw centuries of life, of experience, of carefully controlled emotion suddenly unleashed. I want this. I want you. The bond did not create this desire, Marcus. It simply removed my ability to pretend otherwise. That was all the permission he needed. Marcus released her wrists and pulled her into another kiss, this one deeper, more demanding. Nessa responded with equal intensity, her cool body pressing against his warmth, seeking heat and connection and something neither of them could quite name. They moved together toward the narrow bed, hands exploring, learning each other's shapes and responses. When Marcus's fingers found the hem of the borrowed shirt she wore, Nessa pulled back just enough to let him lift it over her head. Her skin was the color of twilight, marked with delicate scale patterns that caught the cabin's dim light. Beautiful, he murmured. Tracing one of the patterns, she shivered at his touch, her eyes darkening to something almost purple. You are the first to see me like this in longer than I care to remember. Then they were all fools. Their joining was slow at first, careful, each learning what made the other gasp or sigh. But as the bond between them deepened, as that connection thrummed with shared sensation, careful gave way to urgent, gentle gave way to desperate. Nessa's cool skin grew warm beneath his touch, and Marcus felt his own temperature rise to meet hers, as if their bodies were finding some middle ground between human and sanguix. When she bit his shoulder, not to feed but in passion, the brief pain transformed into pleasure so intense it left him breathless. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Nessa's head resting on Marcus's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. The bond hummed between them, content and sated, a presence that now felt as natural as breathing. What happens now? Marcus asked, running his fingers through her hair. Now, Nessa said softly, we run. Together. Trace will not stop hunting me. And the bond between us means you are now as much a target as I am. Running together sounds better than running alone, Marcus replied. Besides, I've been looking for a reason to finally see the outer colonies. She lifted her head to look at him, surprise and something deeper shining in her eyes. You would give up your life, your roots, everything you know, for me? I would give up a lot more than that, Marcus said, and meant it. The realization should have terrified him. He'd known this woman for less than a day, but instead it felt like the most honest thing he'd said in years. Whatever this bond is, whatever we're becoming to each other, I'm not walking away from it. Nessa kissed him softly, reverently. Then we run toward something, not just away. Together. Together, Marcus agreed outside. The stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small ship, carrying two beings who were discovering that sometimes the most impossible connections were the ones worth fighting for. Behind them, somewhere in the void, hunters followed. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and a future neither could predict. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, with a bond neither fully understood thrumming between them, Marcus and Nessa had everything they needed. They had each other, and they had hope got, and sometimes that was enough.